Tonight, dear friend, we enter a quiet story, not a rushed story, not a loud story, not a story that asks anything heavy from you. This is a story for tired minds, for hearts that have been carrying too much, for those who lie awake turning over old words, old losses, and old questions, for those who have tried to trust God and still wonder why some seasons take so long. So let the night become gentle now. Let your breathing soften. Let your shoulders loosen. Let your jaw relax. Let your thoughts stop racing ahead. You do not need to solve tomorrow before sleep comes. You do not need to untangle your whole life tonight. You only need to rest here, in the presence of the God who keeps watch in the dark. Now picture a still and quiet place, a small prison room in Egypt, stone walls cooled by the night air, a silence that is no longer frightening, only deep. A narrow window cut high into the wall, and through that little opening, moonlight. It falls in a pale silver line across the floor. It touches the rough stone. It reaches the hands of a man sitting quietly in the night. Joseph. Not the Joseph of bright robes and youthful energy now. Not the Joseph who once dreamed great dreams and did not yet know how long the road would be. But Joseph in the waiting. Joseph in the hidden years. Joseph in the place where almost nothing seems to be happening. And yet God is nearer than ever. He sits there in the moonlight, still. Perhaps his hands are folded. Perhaps his eyes are lifted toward that small window. Perhaps he is not even speaking much now, because some prayers, after many years, become very quiet. Not empty, not hopeless, only quiet. He has learned that God can hear a prayer before it fully rises into words. He has learned that the Lord can sit beside a weary soul in silence. He has learned that hidden years are not abandoned years. And maybe that is why his story is so tender for the night, because many of us know something about long waiting. We know what it is to live inside a promise we cannot yet see. We know what it is to be misunderstood, to lose what once felt familiar, to serve faithfully in ordinary places, to do the next right thing and still wonder when morning will come, to carry a quiet ache that other people cannot see. So tonight, we will not rush Joseph's story. We will let it unfold slowly. We will walk through it gently. And as we do, maybe your own heart will begin to rest. Maybe you will notice that God has been near to you too, in ways you did not know how to name. Maybe you will remember that heaven is never in a hurry. Maybe you will feel, even now, that the Lord is not absent in the night, but especially kind within it. If these scripture stories become a peaceful place for you to return to night after night, that can be a quiet mercy. But for now, there is nothing you need to do except listen. Nothing to prove, nothing to force, only receive. So settle in now and let the story begin. Before the prison, before Egypt, before the waiting had stretched so long, there was home. There were open skies over Canaan. There were tents and fields, familiar paths and family routines. There was the sound of sheep moving in the distance. There was the earthy smell of land warmed by the day and cooled again by evening. There was the long rhythm of ordinary life, where one day looked very much like another, and yet God was already writing a deeper story than anyone could see. Joseph was young, and youth carries a certain brightness, a kind of fresh openness, a heart that has not yet learned how layered life can become. He was beloved by his father Jacob, and deeply known in the household where he had grown up. He moved through the familiar world of his family without knowing how far from home he would someday be. It is tender to imagine him in those days, walking beneath the sun, resting beneath the stars, listening to voices he had always known, living inside a life that felt settled, even if not perfect. And somewhere in those younger years, God began to whisper through dreams. Not loud announcements, not a full explanation, just dreams. Images that stayed with him. Images that shimmered with meaning he could feel, even if he could not fully understand them. Sheaves bowing, the lights of heaven inclining. Hints that God could see farther than Joseph could. Hints that the story of his life would stretch far beyond the edges of what he knew. And that is often how God begins, not with a complete map, not with every reason, not with a timeline, but with a quiet seed, a holy impression, a stirring, a sense that heaven is speaking softly into an ordinary life. Joseph received those dreams as a young man would, with openness, with wonder, perhaps with more confidence than wisdom, perhaps with a heart too innocent to know how sacred things must sometimes be carried gently. Still, the dreams were real, and that matters, because later, when the road became dark, Joseph would not have many visible signs to hold on to. He would not always have comfort. He would not always have fairness. He would not always have explanation. But deep beneath all the changing circumstances of his life, there had once been a whisper from God, a dream. And even when years passed between the dream and its fulfillment, the dream was never forgotten in heaven. Maybe you know something about that too. Maybe there was once a quiet word over your life, a season when hope came more easily, a time when you sensed that God was near and leading, a tender beginning that did not prepare you for how long the middle would be. If so, rest here for a moment, because Joseph's story reminds us that the distance between promise and fulfillment is not empty space. It is holy ground, too. Even when it feels confusing, even when it feels slow, even when it feels silent. Joseph did not know that yet, not fully. He was still in the early light of things, still standing at the edge of a long path, still learning that dreams from God are gifts, but they are also invitations into trust. And not everyone around him understood what had been placed inside him. That can be lonely, to carry something sacred that others do not quite receive, to sense a direction before anyone else sees it, to hold a mystery in your heart while life around you keeps moving in ordinary patterns. The story in Genesis does not hide the strain in Joseph's family, but tonight, we do not need to linger on sharp edges. What matters for our rest is this: Joseph began his life under God's eye, held in divine awareness, known before the road unfolded, touched by heaven before he understood the cost of waiting. He was not wandering through random years. He was already inside a story of hidden faithfulness. The fields of home could not contain all that God would do. The tented life of his youth was only the beginning, but beginnings are holy too. Perhaps, on some quiet night in those younger years, Joseph lay beneath the stars and wondered about his dreams. Perhaps he listened to the wind moving in the dark. Perhaps he looked upward and felt both comforted and small. Perhaps he could not imagine how far those same stars would one day seem from him. Yet the same God who watched over him there would watch over him everywhere. In the field, on the road, in a foreign house, in a prison, in a palace, in reunion, in old age, in every hidden turn. The Lord who gives the dream remains Lord through the waiting. Let that thought soften your breathing now. The Lord who gives the dream remains Lord through the waiting. You do not need to hurry what heaven has not hurried. You do not need to understand what God has not yet explained. You are allowed to rest, even with unfinished questions. You are allowed to sleep, even in the middle of the story. Joseph could not stay in the early days forever. No one can. The sheltered years of life eventually open into roads we did not expect. Home changes. People change. Circumstances shift. Doors close. New landscapes rise before us. And so the story moved. The young dreamer stepped toward a future he could not read. One day, as many life-changing days begin, it probably felt almost ordinary at first. A task to do, a journey to make, a family errand, the simple movement of one day into the next. Joseph went looking for his brothers. He walked across the land that had once felt familiar and safe. The air was wide around him. The sky above him was open and still, dust underfoot, a horizon ahead. He did not know that this journey would divide his life into before and after. That is often the way with us. There are days that seem simple when they begin. Only later do we realize we crossed a threshold we could never uncross. Tonight we move gently through that threshold. We do not need harshness here. We do not need to lean into fear. The heart of this part of Joseph's story is not danger. It is transition. It is the sorrow of being carried somewhere he never planned to go. It is the ache of sudden distance. It is the mystery of discovering that God can still be present in unfamiliar places. Joseph was separated from home. The rhythms he knew were interrupted. The people and places that once told him who he was were no longer around him in the same way. The familiar sounds of family life faded behind him. The fields of Canaan, the accent of home, the daily patterns of the land of his fathers, all gave way to something else. And then Egypt, a different landscape, a different language all around him, a different way of life. Stone and structure, officials and servants, storehouses and roads, the hush of courtyards in the evening, the glow of oil lamps after sunset, the distant murmur of voices he had not grown up hearing. Can you imagine those first nights? How strange a foreign place can feel after the day has quieted. How deeply the heart notices what is missing once the world grows still. How memory becomes sharper in the dark. Perhaps Joseph lay awake remembering home. The scent of earth after sunset, the known patterns of his father's household, the names he had spoken all his life, the easy belonging that had once surrounded him. Perhaps he wondered how a dream from God could fit inside this kind of exile. This is one of the tender mysteries of faith, because we often assume that if God is with us, life will look increasingly recognizable, increasingly secure, increasingly clear. But Joseph's life tells another story. The Lord was with him, and still he found himself in a place he never would have chosen. The Lord was with him, and still his life became unrecognizable. The Lord was with him, and still he had to learn how to live inside an unwanted chapter. For a weary heart, this is a great comfort, because some people love God deeply and still find themselves in seasons that feel foreign. A marriage changes, a friendship breaks, a body grows weak, a calling seems delayed, a door closes, a family life shifts. A place once called home no longer feels the same. And in those moments, it is easy to wonder whether God has stepped away. But changed circumstances are not proof of divine absence. Egypt was not home, but God was there. Joseph had lost much, but not the presence of the Lord. And so, slowly, he began to live in the place where he had been brought. This is another holy thing. He did not spend his years only mourning what had been. He grieved, no doubt. He remembered, he felt the cost. But he also learned to place his feet in the day before him. One ordinary task, then another. One unfamiliar morning, then another. One evening settling into sleep under strange skies, then another. Sometimes that is how God carries us, not by answering everything at once, but by giving enough grace for one day enough steadiness for one breath, enough light for the next small act of faithfulness. Joseph became a servant in the house of Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh. There, in a setting far from home, his life narrowed into service. Not visible greatness, not fulfilled dreams, not triumph in the eyes of others. Service. Ordinary work. Repeated responsibilities. Daily attentiveness. And yet Scripture tells us something beautiful and simple. The Lord was with Joseph. That line is like a lamp in the dark. The Lord was with Joseph, not only in the dream, not only in youth, not only in the future moment of elevation, but here, in a foreign house, in hidden labor, in the unchosen chapter. This is where so much of life is actually lived, not on mountaintops, not at endings, but in the middle, in routines, in rooms where no one applauds, in tasks that seem small, in service that is rarely noticed. Joseph's story begins to soften and steady here. Instead of resisting every ordinary duty, he gave himself to the work in front of him. He learned the rhythms of the household. He noticed what needed to be done. He became trustworthy. He became the kind of presence that brought peace and order because his life was quietly anchored in God. Can you feel how restful that is? The world often tells us that meaning arrives only when we are noticed, celebrated, or promoted. But the life of Joseph says otherwise. Meaning can live in faithful obscurity. Purpose can breathe inside repetition. God can shape a soul in the unnoticed places. Joseph carried the presence of the Lord into ordinary service, and that presence began to touch the house where he worked. Things prospered under his care. Not because he was striving for importance, but because God's quiet favor rested on him. Perhaps Joseph himself did not always feel prosperous. Perhaps there were still lonely evenings, still memories of home, still private questions, still the ache of waiting. But beneath what he felt, God was building something steady in him: reliability, humility, patience, order, discernment, a calm spirit in responsibility. These are not small things. These are deep things, and often they grow best away from the spotlight. So tonight, if your life feels repetitive, hidden, or plain, do not despise it. The hidden years are not wasted years. The ordinary room may be a place of deep preparation. The quiet task may be shaping you more than the celebrated moment ever could. Joseph was learning how to serve without knowing where that service would lead. He was learning how to steward what was in his hands while the larger story remained concealed. He was learning that faithfulness is not passivity. It is active trust in the God who sees. And this kind of trust grows slowly, like roots in dry ground, like oil poured one drop at a time, like moonlight inching across a floor through the night. Pause here for a moment. Let your body sink a little deeper into rest. Let your mind stop trying to leap ahead. The God of Joseph is not impatient with slow seasons. He is present inside them. He is gentle with your unfinished story. He is near while the meaning is still hidden. In time, the path in Potiphar's house grew painful. Joseph did what was right, and still he was misunderstood. He chose integrity, and still a false accusation fell across his life like a shadow. The chapter he had served so faithfully did not end with visible reward. Instead, the road narrowed again. Many hearts know that sorrow, the sorrow of doing right and not being understood, the sorrow of keeping a clean conscience and still being spoken of wrongly, the sorrow of watching a season of quiet faithfulness collapse into another kind of waiting. Joseph entered prison, and the human heart might ask, how can this be? What became of the dreams? What became of the promise? What became of the quiet signs that God was near? But again, the story gives us the same soft and steady line. The Lord was with Joseph, in prison too. Not outside the walls, not only before or after, but in prison. This is the holy stubbornness of divine faithfulness. It does not vanish when the chapter grows dark. It does not retreat when the road becomes unfair. It does not depend on the comfort of the setting. The Lord was with Joseph. Let that line become a blanket over your thoughts tonight. Maybe you have entered a chapter you never would have chosen. Maybe your life feels smaller than it once did. Maybe something precious has been delayed or taken away. Maybe you have done your best and still ended up in a place of waiting. The Lord is not frightened by the walls around you. He is not absent from the hidden room. He is not confused by your delay. He is with you. Now let us return to that moonlit prison window, because this is where the heart of Joseph's story deepens. The prison years did not pass in a blur. They were made of real nights, real mornings, real silence, real routines. The air there may have felt cool before dawn. The stone may have held the memory of darkness even after the sun rose. The footsteps of guards may have echoed in the hallway. The sounds of other lives, other sorrows, other waiting hearts may have drifted in and out. And beyond that high, narrow opening, the sky moved on in its own rhythm. Stars appearing, the moon waxing and waning, morning light arriving and leaving, seasons turning where Joseph could not go. There is something especially tender about long waiting when the world beyond you keeps moving. People marry, children grow, harvests come and go, homes change, and somewhere inside a hidden place, someone keeps waiting. Joseph knew something of that feeling, yet prison did not become the end of his soul, because God was still at work where almost no one else could see. This hidden work matters so much. We often think of God's work only as visible change, the open door, the healing, the answered prayer, the promotion, the reunion. But God is often doing his deepest work before any of that appears. In prison, Joseph's circumstances were limited, but his inner life with God was being quietly enlarged. He was learning endurance without bitterness. He was learning attentiveness in confinement. He was learning that purpose is not canceled by limitation. He was learning how to notice other weary souls, even while carrying his own burden. This is beautiful, because suffering can make a person fold inward. And that is understandable. Pain narrows our field of vision. Weariness makes us small. Disappointment can turn the heart into a room with the curtains drawn. But Joseph, by the grace of God, did not stop seeing. He still noticed. He still cared. He still listened. He still served. Even in prison, trustworthiness rose from him like a quiet fragrance. The keeper of the prison came to rely on him, just as others had before. Responsibility found him again. Not glamorous responsibility, not public honor, just hidden stewardship in a hidden place. And this tells us something lovely about Joseph's soul. Faithfulness had become part of him. He was no longer just a young man carrying dreams. He was becoming a man shaped by communion with God in the dark. A man whose stability did not depend on outward change. A man whose heart had learned not to waste the waiting. The prison years were long. Genesis does not tell us every detail, and perhaps that is its own mercy, because hidden seasons often feel too repetitive to narrate in full. There are only so many ways to say it. Another day, another night, another prayer, another stretch of silence. And yet, God counts them all. He does not skip over the nights you think do not matter. He does not overlook the tears no one else saw. He does not dismiss the days that felt unchanged. He is Lord of the long, middle. Maybe Joseph sat sometimes under that moonlit window and remembered the dreams of his youth. Maybe they felt distant. Maybe they felt strange, almost like they belonged to someone else. Maybe he no longer tried to force the meaning. Maybe he simply held them quietly in the background of his heart. This, too, is wisdom. There are seasons when we hold God's promises tightly because they are fresh and bright. And there are seasons when we can only rest near them quietly, without demanding to know more. The promise does not become less true in the silence. It simply passes into God's keeping until the right hour. One day, two of Pharaoh's officials entered Joseph's prison world. The chief cupbearer and the chief baker. Their faces carried the strain of uncertainty. Their sleep had been disturbed. Their hearts were troubled by dreams they could not understand. And Joseph noticed. This small moment reveals so much. He was still paying attention to the sorrow of others, still tender enough to ask what burdened them, still available to be used by God, even inside his own delay. The man who was waiting had become the man who could sit gently beside another person's unrest. That is often how God softens a soul. He does not waste our long nights. He often turns them into compassion. We come to recognize the look in someone else's eyes because we have worn it ourselves. We learn to speak softly because we know what it is to be fragile. We become a little slower, a little kinder, a little more patient with trembling hearts. Joseph listened to the troubled men. He did not speak from pride. He did not claim power for himself. Instead, with calm humility, he acknowledged that interpretations belong to God. That is so restful. After all his years of waiting, Joseph's relationship to the gifts of God had grown gentler. He was not grasping. He was not trying to prove himself. He was simply available. Tell me your dreams. And they did. The cupbearer first, then the baker. Their dreams carried meanings Joseph could see because God gave light. He spoke truth with care. One dream carried restoration, the other a sorrowful ending. And Joseph, perhaps with a faint rising of hope in his own heart, asked the cupbearer to remember him when restoration came. It is a deeply human moment. Even mature faith still hopes. Even steady souls long for the door to open. Even those who trust God may feel the tremor of possibility when help seems near. Perhaps Joseph lay awake that night under the moonlight, not anxious exactly, but quietly wondering. Could this be the beginning of change? Could remembrance be coming? Could the years of silence be nearing their end? But when the cupbearer was restored, he forgot Joseph. Another ache, another silence, another layer of waiting. Some of the hardest nights in life are the ones after hope briefly rises and then fades again. Not the empty night, but the almost night. The night after the door seemed ready to open. The night after the prayer seemed close to an answer. The night after the conversation, the opportunity, the sign. And yet even there, God was not absent. This is the part of the story where the listener is invited not to strain. Because if you have known that kind of disappointment, the soul grows tired in a very particular way. It stops wanting to get its hopes up. It stops reaching as quickly. It becomes cautious with expectation. So let Joseph's life whisper to that place tonight. Being forgotten by a person is not the same as being forgotten by God. Delayed by people is not delayed beyond heaven's sight. The Lord is not careless with timing. He is not scrambling. He is not behind. Joseph may have looked forgotten in the prison, but heaven's memory was full and exact. Every year, every month, every unseen act of faithfulness, every prayer breathed into the dark, every quiet choice to remain soft before God instead of hardening into bitterness. Nothing was lost. This hidden accounting of heaven is one of the most comforting truths for the night, because so much of what matters most is unseen on earth. The moment you chose gentleness instead of anger. The day you kept going when no one praised your strength. The prayer you whispered with tears. The burden you carried quietly. The forgiveness you began before your feelings fully followed. The ordinary task you did with love. The trust you offered God without public evidence. He sees it all. The prison years were not empty years. They were full of holy formation. Patience was being woven into Joseph. The kind of patience that does not merely wait for relief, but learns to breathe with God inside the delay. Strength was being woven into him. Not loud strength, not hard strength, but quiet strength. The kind that can remain steady without announcing itself. Compassion was being woven into him. Because people who have sat in darkness often learn to speak softly to those still sitting there. Discernment was being woven into him. A wisdom not born of theory, but of listening to God in places where worldly certainty had failed. And above all, nearness to God was being woven into him. Not the nearness of excitement only, but the nearness of companionship, the kind that can survive silence, the kind that can sit in moonlight and know that heaven has not turned away. Pause here now. Feel the stillness in the room where you are. Let the story slow your thoughts. Imagine silver light slipping through Joseph's small prison window. Imagine the hush of late night. Imagine his breathing steadying. Imagine your own heart resting beside his. You do not need to force the morning. You do not need to defend your whole story tonight. You do not need to pry open what God has closed for now. Rest in the quiet faithfulness of the one who works where no one else sees. Years passed, and then, one day, something shifted, not gradually from Joseph's point of view, not in a way he could have predicted. Morning came with a summons. Pharaoh had dreamed dreams that disturbed his spirit. None of Egypt's wise men could give a satisfying meaning, and suddenly memory stirred in the cupbearer. At last he remembered the young Hebrew in prison who had interpreted truly. What a quiet mystery this is. A man may forget. Years may pass. The door may stay shut long beyond what feels reasonable. And still, at the appointed moment, one sentence can bring the waiting to a threshold. Joseph was called. Can you picture the movement of that day? The change in the air, the guard arriving, the message given, the sense that the familiar confinement of years was, at least for this moment, opening. Joseph was brought out of the pit. He shaved, he changed his clothes, he stood before Pharaoh. This scene could be told with triumph, but tonight we tell it softly, because Joseph did not rush into that room with pride. He did not become loud with long-suppressed ambition. The years had gentled him. When Pharaoh spoke of Joseph's supposed power to interpret dreams, Joseph answered with humility, "It is not in me." God will give Pharaoh an answer of peace. An answer of peace. How beautiful those words are. After all the years of Joseph's own unrest, God had formed in him the ability to speak peace into another person's uncertainty. Pharaoh described the dreams. Cows coming up from the Nile, grain appearing in striking images, abundance followed by famine. And Joseph, by the wisdom of God, understood what the dreams meant. 7 years of plenty were coming, then 7 years of famine. Egypt must prepare wisely during the abundant years, so that many lives could be preserved during the lean years. Notice the tenderness of God here. The same God who had once spoken through Joseph's dreams now spoke through Pharaoh's dreams. The same God who had sustained Joseph in hidden places was now opening a path by means of the very gift that had marked Joseph from the beginning. Nothing had been wasted, Nothing had been random. The threads were gathering. Pharaoh saw the wisdom of God in Joseph. He recognized a spirit of understanding and calm insight that surpassed others. And in a single turn, Joseph was lifted from prison into leadership. Again, we do not need to tell this with noise. For Joseph, this was not merely success. It was not personal revenge against the years. It was not the satisfying correction of everyone who had underestimated him. It was stewardship, responsibility, service enlarged, faithfulness given wider ground. This is part of what makes Joseph's elevation so peaceful, because the hidden years had already taught him how to carry weight. He had practiced administration in small places. He had learned restraint. He had learned to listen. He had learned that gifts belong to God. He had learned how to care about preservation, not just progress. So when visible responsibility came, it did not create his character. It revealed what God had been forming all along. Perhaps that is a word for your heart tonight. The years that looked like delay may have been preparation. The hidden place may have been forming capacities you could not have received any other way. The restraint, the patience, the compassion, the steadiness being formed in you now may one day become shelter for others. Joseph was set over the land of Egypt. He moved from confinement into broad responsibility. He organized storage during the years of abundance. He prepared wisely. He did not panic when the season was favorable, because wisdom looks ahead with calm. He did not waste the years of plenty, because God's insight had been given for care. The land yielded abundantly. Grain was gathered, storehouses filled. Order spread across the nation under Joseph's leadership. And underneath all this visible change, the heart of the story remained the same. The Lord was with Joseph in the field, in the house, in the prison, before Pharaoh, over Egypt. The setting changed. The presence did not. What rest there is in that. Because we often wait for our setting to change before we believe peace can come. We think peace will finally arrive when the answer comes, when the person returns, when the body heals, when the opportunity opens, when the explanation arrives. But Joseph's life says peace can begin much earlier than that. Peace begins where God's presence is trusted, and God's presence is not postponed until the happy chapter. So if you are still in a hidden season tonight, do not imagine that peace must wait until everything makes sense. The God who met Joseph in prison can meet you now. The God who held him through unanswered years can hold you in this exact hour. The God who brought him out at the right time knows the shape of your story, too. Rest here for a moment. No striving, no forcing, no measuring how much longer. Just rest. Morning belongs to God. Timing belongs to God. Your soul does not need to carry what his hands already hold. As the years unfolded, famine came just as Joseph had said. The land felt the emptiness. Need spread across regions. And because of the wisdom God had given Joseph, bread could be found in Egypt. This is where the old story began to circle back toward home. Far away, Joseph's brothers heard that there was grain in Egypt. Need drove them southward. Hunger moved them where comfort would not have moved them. And without knowing it, they began to walk toward the brother they had never expected to see again. Joseph saw them. Pause with that for a moment. After all the years, after the field, after the separation, after the foreign house, after the prison, after the forgotten weight, after the sudden lifting, he saw them. We do not need to turn this moment into suspense. Its deepest note is not shock. It is tenderness. It is the trembling realization that God has brought back into one room what had once been scattered. Joseph recognized them, though they did not recognize him. He stood before the very people tied to his earliest wound, and yet he was no longer the same young man. Time had passed. God had worked. Suffering had ripened into wisdom. Joseph's response was complex as real forgiveness often is. He did not fling open his whole heart in one instant. He moved carefully. He tested. He listened. He watched what years had done in others. This is gentle and important. Forgiveness in Scripture is not denial. It is not pretending pain never existed. It is not rushing the heart faster than grace is moving. Joseph's path toward reconciliation had room for tears, room for process, room for careful wisdom. And through it all, we see that God had enlarged him. Again and again, Joseph was overcome with feeling. He wept. He stepped aside. He returned. He carried deep currents within himself. Tears are not a failure of faith here. They are part of healed humanity. A softened heart can hold sorrow and mercy at the same time. Joseph listened to his brothers speak among themselves, unaware that he understood. He heard the language of regret. He saw signs of changed hearts. He watched as the old family story, once marked by jealousy and blindness, began to tremble under the weight of truth and time. He made space for unfolding. He did not need to crush them. He did not need to make pain louder. God had already given him a larger place to stand. How restful it is when revenge no longer rules a heart. Joseph had authority now, real authority, earthly power, the ability to act from injury if he chose. But the long years with God had loosened bitterness's grip. This is one of the greatest miracles in the whole story. Not merely that Joseph was raised to prominence, but that he was raised without becoming hard. That suffering had not turned him cruel. That memory had not chained him to vengeance. That the man who once sat by a prison window could now face old wounds with tears instead of violence. This is hidden faithfulness, too. God was not only preparing grain for hungry nations, he was preparing mercy in Joseph's heart. The scenes with Benjamin, with the brothers returning, with Joseph's emotions rising and settling, all carry this quiet beauty. The past is not erased. The pain is not imaginary. And yet grace is moving underneath it all. At last, Joseph could no longer hold back. He sent others from the room. He stood before his brothers with tears, and he told them who he was. I am Joseph. Those words must have fallen into the room like thunder wrapped in mercy. But even then, Joseph did not move toward vengeance. He moved toward comfort. His brothers were troubled, afraid, overwhelmed by what stood before them. And Joseph, with the wisdom only suffering with God can produce, began to reframe the story, not by calling evil good, not by praising what had been wrong, but by placing the whole broken history inside a larger faithfulness. He helped them see that God had been at work to preserve life, that what had once looked like only loss had become, under God's mysterious hand, a path of rescue, that heaven had not approved the wound, but had refused to waste it. This is one of the holiest truths in Joseph's life. God's hidden faithfulness does not mean every chapter feels good while we are in it. It does not mean every act of others is harmless. It does not mean pain was unreal. It means that God's mercy is deeper than the damage. It means his providence can carry a story farther than our injury can imagine. It means the dark chapters do not hold final authorship. Joseph welcomed his brothers near. He spoke kindly to them. He told them not to sink into despair. He pointed them toward preservation, toward reunion, toward the larger movement of God. Then came the invitation to bring Jacob, his father, and the whole household into Egypt, where provision could be given. The years of separation were bending toward embrace. What must it have been like for Jacob to hear that Joseph was alive? The son long mourned, the name carried in sorrow, the ache folded into family memory for years. Alive, and not only alive, but placed in a position through which many had been saved. The family journeyed. The reunion came. Joseph fell upon his father and wept, and in that embrace, perhaps so many silent years were gathered up, not explained away, not undone, but met, held, bathed in the tears of a God-governed reunion. There is a kind of peace that arrives not because the past was simple, but because God has been faithful through its complexity. Joseph's story is full of that peace. He had dreamed as a boy. He had waited as a man. He had served in obscurity. He had suffered misunderstanding. He had sat in confinement. He had watched time pass. He had been raised suddenly. He had faced the faces of his past. And now he stood in a place where mercy was stronger than memory's sharpest edge. This does not mean all sorrow vanished. The Bible is too honest for that. Human hearts remain layered. Families carry history. Loss leaves marks. But marks can become holy too when touched by grace. Years later, after Jacob died, Joseph's brothers were afraid again. Perhaps they wondered whether Joseph's kindness had only been for their father's sake. Perhaps old anxiety rose in them. Perhaps shame still whispered. How patient Joseph was then. He wept again when they spoke in fear, and he reassured them. He would not take God's place. He would not become their destroyer. He would care for them and their children. He spoke kindly to them. That phrase matters. He spoke kindly to them. Kindness at the end of a long story. Kindness from a man who had every earthly reason to be severe. Kindness shaped by years of walking with the God who stays near in hidden places. And then Joseph spoke words that have echoed through generations. Words often paraphrased because their truth is so large and tender. What others meant for harm, God meant for good, for the saving of many lives. This is not a slogan. It is not a neat ribbon tied around suffering. It is the slow insight of a life lived with God through every chapter. Joseph could say it because he had watched the faithfulness of God outlast every dark turn. He had seen that the dream was not dead in the pit, that the promise was not canceled in servanthood, that the Lord was not absent in prison, that forgetfulness by man did not mean forgetfulness by heaven, that elevation was not for self alone, but for preservation, that forgiveness was stronger than vengeance, that peace could indeed stand at the far end of a long night. Take a deep and gentle breath here. Let the story settle around you like a soft covering. Perhaps you came tonight carrying your own hidden years, your own long waiting, your own misunderstood chapter, your own quiet grief that does not fit into quick conversations. Then let Joseph sit beside you by the moonlit window for a little while longer. He does not rush you. He does not scold your weariness. He does not pretend the long night is easy. But his life bears witness to something steady and kind. God is faithful in hidden places, not only after them, in them. He is faithful when the dream is still young, faithful when home is far away, faithful in service that feels ordinary, faithful when integrity is misunderstood, faithful in prisons of delay, faithful when people forget, faithful when morning suddenly opens, faithful when old wounds return, faithful when forgiveness seems costly, faithful at the end when peace ripens slowly at last. And maybe that is what your heart most needs tonight. Not a rushed answer, not a dramatic breakthrough, but the quiet assurance that your life is still held inside a story God has not abandoned. Maybe you need permission to stop trying to read every page before it turns. Maybe you need permission to trust that the unseen work matters. Maybe you need permission to rest in the middle before you know the ending. Joseph's life gives that permission, because much of what God did in him happened before anyone celebrated it. Much of what mattered most was formed in private. Much of what preserved others began as hidden faithfulness in a hidden room. And that means Your hidden life matters too. Your prayers in the dark matter. Your small acts of obedience matter. Your choosing softness instead of bitterness matters. Your continuing to love in ordinary ways matters. Your surrendering tomorrow back into God's hands matters. Your breathing through another night with trust, however trembling, matters. He sees it all. He remembers what others forget. He guards what others cannot understand. He tends what looks barren. He prepares what looks delayed. He shelters what feels exposed. He nourishes roots before fruit appears. The God of Joseph is not in a hurry. The God of Joseph is not late. The God of Joseph is not confused by the path your life has taken. And the God of Joseph is with you now. So imagine again that quiet prison room under moonlight, the small window, the silver line on the floor, the stillness of the hour. At first, it looks like a place where nothing important could be happening. Just waiting. Just another night. Just stone and silence. But now, knowing the whole story, you can see differently. You know that this room was not empty of meaning. You know that this waiting was not wasted. You know that heaven's faithfulness filled the silence. You know that this hidden chapter held seeds of preservation, mercy, wisdom, and peace. And perhaps your own hidden places may be more full of God than they appear tonight. Perhaps the prayer that feels weak is still heard in heaven. Perhaps the chapter that feels delayed is still under divine care. Perhaps the season that looks small is forming deep roots. Perhaps the tears no one else knows are watering something holy. Perhaps God is nearer than your anxious thoughts have been able to feel. Rest in that possibility now. No need to strive. No need to force clarity. No need to hold yourself upright by sheer effort. Let your body grow heavy. Let the bed support you. Let the night become a mercy instead of an argument. Let the story of Joseph become a soft lamp in your mind. He waited. God was faithful. He served quietly. God was faithful. He was misunderstood. God was faithful. He sat in the dark. God was faithful. He was forgotten by men. God was faithful. He was lifted in due time. God was faithful. He forgave and found peace. God was faithful again and again. Through every turning, through every slow year, through every hidden hour, God was faithful. And because he was faithful to Joseph, you may rest in his faithfulness too. The details of your story are your own. The exact shape of your waiting may be different. You may not know where the next chapter will open. You may not know how God will weave together what feels scattered now. But you do not need all those answers to sleep. You do not need the whole map to be held. You do not need the explanation before you receive the peace. You only need the shepherd of the night, the keeper of hidden things, the God who remains present in rooms the world forgets. Perhaps tonight, instead of asking when everything will change, your soul can ask a gentler question. Where is God with me here? And perhaps the answer, carried softly on the quiet, is this: here, still here, closer than your breath, steady as moonlight, tender as mercy, faithful as ever. So now the story lowers its voice. Joseph is no longer striving. The years have settled. The sharpest edges have softened in God's hands. He has seen enough of the Lord's goodness to rest in what he cannot control. He has learned that peace is not the absence of a hard history. It is the presence of God within it. And you, dear listener, may rest too. Let the old questions loosen. Let the need to understand everything tonight drift farther away. Let your thoughts become slower and kinder. Let your heart feel less alone inside its hidden chapters. Think of Joseph sitting quietly beneath the moonlit window. He does not know all that is ahead. Not yet. but he is held. Think of Joseph standing before Pharaoh. The years have not broken him. They have deepened him. Think of Joseph weeping as he forgives. Pain has not become the end of his story. Mercy has. Think of Joseph speaking kindly at the close of his life. God's hidden faithfulness has ripened into peace. And now think of your own night. This room, this bed, this hour, this body that may feel tired to the bone, this mind that has carried so much. The Lord is here too. He is here in the quiet, here in the slowing breath, here in the questions not yet answered, here in the weariness, here in the unfinished story, here in the hidden years. You are not beyond his sight, not beyond his reach, not beyond his tenderness. And if all you can do tonight is rest in that, it is enough. Enough to breathe, enough to release, enough to let sleep come like a gentle mercy, enough to trust that the same God who watched over Joseph through every hidden hour is watching over you now. So breathe in peace and breathe out striving. Breathe in mercy and breathe out the need to figure everything out. Breathe in the nearness of God and breathe out the fear that you have been forgotten. Again, breathe in peace. Breathe out striving. Breathe in mercy. Breathe out the need to force tomorrow. Breathe in God's faithful presence. Breathe out the loneliness of the long night. Let the story become very simple now. Joseph waited. God stayed. Joseph wondered. God stayed. Joseph served. God stayed. Joseph suffered. God stayed. Joseph hoped. God stayed. Joseph wept. God stayed. Joseph forgave. God stayed. And through it all, God carried the story toward peace. May that same peace begin to settle over you now. Softly, gently, without effort. May your thoughts grow quieter. May your breathing grow deeper. May your body feel safe enough to rest. May the hidden rooms of your life be warmed by the knowledge that God is already there. No chapter is unseen by him. No sigh is wasted. No delayed season lies outside his care. He is with you in the ordinary, with you in the ache, with you in the unanswered middle, with you in the night, with you now. The moonlight still falls softly through the prison window. The stone floor is still. The air is cool and calm. Joseph sits quietly, and heaven is nearer than it seems. And in your own quiet room, heaven is nearer than it seems too. So rest. Rest under the hidden faithfulness of God. Rest without having to hold up the world. Rest without having to solve the story. Rest as one who is seen. Rest as one who is gently kept. Rest as one whose life is still safely held in the hands of a good and patient God. Nothing more is needed now. Only stillness, only breath, only the slow kindness of the Lord. Sleep can come gently. Peace can come gently. God can hold you gently. And as the night deepens, let these final comforts remain. The Lord was with Joseph. The Lord is with you. The Lord remembered Joseph. The Lord remembers you. The Lord carried Joseph through the hidden years. The Lord will carry you through yours. The Lord brought peace at the end of Joseph's long waiting. And the Lord is already at work in ways you cannot yet see. So be still now. Be still in body. Be still in thought. Be still in the quiet love of God. You are not alone in the night. You are not abandoned in the waiting. You are not forgotten in the hidden chapter. You are held. You are seen. You are gently kept. And as the night grows still around you, may the God who stayed with Joseph through every hidden hour hold you in quiet peace, and let your weary heart rest at last.